Good evening. Welcome to another edition of the Press Club with me, Kendall Burton, and my co-host, Mr. Earl Bousquet, reviewing the big stories making news each and every week, starting with a review of today's newspapers. The Voice newspaper, public to get full details on Monday, big tax amnesty, and CARICOM appeals for help for Haiti and the Bahamas. The Mirror newspapers, schools thefts condemned, authorities denounce the spate of school burglaries on island. Photos of the Cashees Comprehensive School and the Prime Minister who paid a visit to that institution after it was robbed recently. And the Star newspaper, wise judge under attack, CCJ prosecute crooked government ministers. And of course we have the usual inserts from the from the Star newspaper, the Tonight magazine and the Sports and Health magazine, as well as the Yo magazine featuring Kicking with Nikita, a feature on a young up-and-coming entrepreneur. What sticks out in your mind this week? What's your big story?
Unfortunately, it's on none of the front pages except in a reference to CARICOM requesting, appealing for help for Haiti. You know, we once again saying poor Haiti.
Yeah.
We can easily say, well, we're lucky. You know, we got heavy winds, and the most we suffered from was fallen trees, landslides. Not one death, many persons were displaced but replaced at home immediately after. So in terms of the natural consequences, in terms of, or should I say in terms of the consequences in terms of cost of life, we haven't paid. But then we don't normally, or we shouldn't continue to measure the effects of hurricanes or storms or various weather patterns on the human or material cost, because there are so many costs that go in there in terms of the cost of recovery, the cost of rebuilding, the cost of the stalling of progress on things affected. And one of the good things about the advance in media technology today, and I keep saying it every week, is that within the past 40 years we have emerged from having to depend on the external press, BBC, etc., Associated Press, to let us know what happened in the Caribbean. We had to listen to Radio Antilles to know what happened in Jamaica or Haiti. We had to depend on everybody from Lionel Ellis and Timothy James, you know, with the ham radios to let us know and put us in contact with people at home and abroad. Today, we can get live coverage. We could see how the hurricane is approaching. We could see the damage from a drone. You know, we could, and when we see what's happening in Haiti, what happened in Haiti, of course, we have to understand why people would increasingly ask if Haiti has a blight. You know, that from 1990 until now, every single thing that can happen to a country and a population have happened to Haiti. In Jeremy, the city of Jeremy, with about 4 million inhabitants, the report out of there was that in that city alone, 80% of the buildings were left without roofs. And following what's happening in Haiti on BBC yesterday, every half hour, they would give you the death toll in Haiti. It started at 100. Half an hour later, it went to 200. Half an hour later, it went to 300. Then it went to 5. Then it went to 8 at the last I heard, in a matter of 6 hours.
Yeah, but you know, that was never in doubt. From the time we heard that Hurricane Matthew was heading toward Haiti, the humanitarian agencies let it be known that the deaths were inevitable. Because as you pointed out, Haiti has been battered by every natural disaster imaginable, and they've not had time to recover, especially from the earthquake. 7 years later, the infrastructure has not been the best. The buildings, you know, people living in makeshift.
Tens of thousands of people died from cholera.
So they were very vulnerable.
And the conditions now create conditions for cholera
And
to
a
return.
lot of other things. Yeah.
The aid agencies are saying, listen, it's going to take 5 days before we start to get a clear picture of what is happening in Haiti. Because as a result of earlier situations, many places are still cut off. And what has happened now is that access by road has been cut off to rural areas. So it is now, while people are uncovering the rubble, they come across bodies. And I mean, one of the graphic images I saw last night was that in those areas where vehicles cannot yet reach, ambulances and hearses and so on, they simply dig in holes, pouring the bodies into it, throwing kerosene on them and burning them, and then covering them. You know, that's the harsh reality in Haiti. But then look at the effects of climate.
That's coming out of what has happened before. And again, as you pointed out, the cholera and the situation is ripe for a lot of things that happen, including violence, looting, theft, rape, you know.
Corruption.
That too, especially when the aid money starts flowing in.
Yeah, every major disaster in Haiti results in a heavy corruption scandal. The election has been postponed. It was postponed because the hurricane was coming. I can predict it's not going to come back soon because the ruling class in Haiti always looks for every reason to keep postponing elections until they are sure that they can get and select a president for election that is going to not make things get any better than they are. But I was saying, when you start to look at the effects of climate change on weather patterns, the United States is beginning to learn that. This year, President Obama and President Xi Jinping were able to bring the United States and China on board the climate change train as two major contributors that had refused to sign up. They signed up. Obama was under pressure. Donald Trump said, you know, climate change was made by the Chinese. It's not man-made or an act of God. It's something that the Chinese created to dominate the world. It so happens now that Matthew, after having left a piece of its tail down here, given what I went through yesterday morning, in terms of the rain and so on, and the heavy wind and darkness, the Matthew has now gone from the Eastern Caribbean up north, hit Haiti, hit Jamaica, hit the Bahamas, head to Florida. It's going to do quite a lot of damage in terms of storm surges along the beach side, along the Florida coastline, plus 2 other states to be affected. And the Met people in the United States and the World Meteorological Organization have predicted now that Hurricane Matthew is going to hit the United States for about 2 days, and then it's going to go back out into the ocean and make a U-turn and come back again to the Bahamas and head back to Florida. Now they're telling you these are things that haven't happened in 50 years, in 100 years, that a hurricane goes, makes a short turn and comes right back. It's like lightning hitting a place twice, you know, and I think if anything that Matthew is going to teach Americans why it was wise to pay attention to climate change.
Yeah, but we've been warned over and over to expect these sort of things, these unusual phenomena happening. And based on that, when we come back with you for a break, perhaps we can talk a little bit more about what we should expect from the climate change in the region as far as the calls this week for building codes. Yeah? You're watching The Press Club. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about Hurricane Matthew and its impact on Haiti, the Bahamas, the coast of Florida. Florida escaped relatively unharmed, and there was no major damage or loss of life there. But we're talking about the irregular movement if I can use that term,
It's
of
mainly the
Hurricane
coastline.
Matthew. But as I was saying before the break, we've been warned to expect unusual weather patterns, more intense hurricanes, more rainfall. We've had our experiences with that. Look at the hurricane, the Christmas Eve trough of 2013. We have also been put on guard, and NEMO has said since 2015 that it plans to change its focus from purely meteorological disasters and hazards to looking at other hazards like earthquakes and tsunamis and that sort of thing. The seismic unit at the University of the West Indies has been predicting that the Caribbean is overdue for a major 8.0 earthquake. This week we heard the Chief Engineer in the Ministry of Infrastructure calling for building codes to be legislated that would dictate anything from the material that is used in building, whether it is homes, bridges, or other infrastructure, to make them more resilient to those sort of disasters that we're talking about. How practical do you see that? And do you see maybe the media playing a role in getting us to that stage?
Everything is possible. Everything that is necessary ought to be made possible. And our role as media is always to see how best we could make what is necessary possible by helping make it happen. In my 4 decades in the profession here, the question of a building code is one that has been coming up quite regularly in the last 25 years. More from an activist standpoint, however, from the standpoint of not builders, the guys who draw the designs, architects. And other progressive-minded persons who, because of their awareness of the impact of climate change on weather and the consequences for small island states like ours. God forbid a tsunami, long overdue, we're told, by over 200 years. Lord forbid a tsunami decides to visit the Caribbean. Our low-lying areas. What's going to happen to Barbados? What's going to happen to Montserrat, St. Kitts, Nevis, Anguilla? Is everybody going to climb to the tallest mountain? Will the tallest mountain be tall enough? In the case of St. Lucia, we're mountainous. St. Lucia and Dominica. St. Vincent to a lesser extent. Will the mountains be high enough to take all of us for, in the event of a tsunami? Are there roads into the mountains? You know, are we prepared to run anyway? In the United States, with the hurricane approaching, and in places like that, in those developed, so-called developed countries, people are asked to evacuate. You know, they head on the highway and they go. Australia, they run from burning, from fires, you know. But we have NEMO, which is an institution which is preaching what it practices and hoping that it could encourage everybody to understand why it's saying what it's saying and doing what it does. The activism by the architects is not enough, because activists are often in a minority, and you're going against the flow. So you always sound different and you're treated differently by the status quo. I think that a new building code is absolutely necessary for all the reasons that you've pointed out. And if we have to accept that it is necessary, then the press will have to play a big role in explaining why it is necessary. We could look at the consequences of bad building in not Pakistan, Bangladesh. And in those countries, it doesn't take disasters, natural disasters, bad building, and the places just collapse.
Yeah.
Okay. In St. Lucia, we have the Ministry of Communications and Works, Infrastructure, whatever is the name now, is responsible for measuring cement. You know, the content of the cement to see whether it will stand. So I think that in order to get a new building code, the press will have to play a major role in explaining to people why it is in the interest of us all to have proper buildings. The contractors will have to be on board, because in the competition between contractors, there are those who wouldn't mind getting a lesser job
Yeah.
for less money in order to get the job. You would need the various stakeholders in terms of the building industry, but the most important are the people who are going to be living and working in those buildings, and that is where we come in as the press. And we have to be able to recognize, understand, accept, and convince ourselves first of all that it's necessary, and having done that, to start to do the things to show, starting at home, our family and our friends and the people who we write for, is that, listen, this is in our interest. And we have Mr. Google and everything else to draw examples to show people the cost of not moving. But not only that, look at the whole...
You use a keyword there, not moving. My issue is that we have not moved. We've been talking about it. How long has it been since that scientist from UE made that prediction? It's been a few years now. It's been 2015 and NEMO said it's going to change its priorities as far as its work plan moving forward. We've had the experience of the hurricane trough and everything else. We had the Prime Minister sign an agreement, I think it was Chile at the time. They had just been hit by an earthquake. What has been done? What concrete steps have been taken to move us in that direction? The earthquake, unlike the hurricane, doesn't give us any warning. We don't have time to prepare for it. It will hit and it will just, that's it. So what are we waiting for? And then maybe that's where the activism and the media comes in, to apply the pressure to get it done. Just move beyond just talking.
Because we have historically been a reactive people. We react. We say, boy, let's see what we can do to prevent that from happening again. But then something else comes and deflects us. I saw a very interesting story last night on DBS about the farmer who the earthquake had wiped away his entire plot. And one could see that, yes, he lost all, but he was determined, because he said, hello, people could say what they want, I'm going to start all over again. Now, have we resigned ourselves to accepting that hurricanes come every year and they will damage every year and we never know where it's going to happen? Or do we, like the scientists and NEMO and all the preparatory agencies are saying, understand, work from the possibility, always saying it could be us next? And there again, like I said, the rain don't fall on one man's house, it falls on our houses as media people too. And it is incumbent upon us to better understand the issues that are at play, so that we could better convince the doubting Thomases and the others who... I heard President Obama begging Americans. He said, listen, if you have to move and you haven't moved, move. We can replace property, but we cannot replace lives. The governor of one of the states was saying, hello, if you haven't moved, move, because that hurricane will kill you. They were that frank, and therefore I think that's how it goes.
We're due for another break. We'll take it when we come back. We'll look at some of the other stories making news this week, and as well in the papers today, the Star, the Voice, and the Mirror newspaper. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Press Club. We're reviewing today's newspapers. The Voice editorial for today caught my attention. The need for social transformation on page 4. If I can just read the first paragraph. The term social transformation in the context of ministerial portfolios in government in St. Lucia was heard here for the first time in 1997 when the St. Lucia Labour Party came to power. Instead of a ministry responsible for social services, as we had for many years before, we got one that was to be responsible for social transformation. It seemed a timely change if the motive was truly to transform the society where good values, ideals and habits had taken a beating the preceding years. And it goes on to talk about what social transformation, or its interpretation, or the editors or writers' interpretation of social transformation is. And as I read those first couple paragraphs, even though I'm not it brought me back to some discussions that we've had in terms of the definitions of words, whether in terms of the context or the profession within which they use. And I don't think in this case the words or the term social transformation means or is intended to mean what the editorial in The Voice is suggesting. But it raises some interesting points. It talks about how our youth are going. It talks about the economy. It talks about the burglaries at the school, and the need for us to reintroduce civics in school, something that we have spoken about before. But while I won't focus too much on the what I consider to be an error in the definition of social transformation in the editorial, it does raise some interesting points about the need for us to instill in our people a sense of national pride in order to correct some of the negative aspects that we are seeing developing in our youth. Now, it brings me back to a conversation I had with Zachary Hippolyte, the police press officer, off the record, ahead of a recent press conference. And he seems to hold the view, like a lot of other young people, that it's too late for this generation. You know, and as you read the editorial, you're talking about the need for us to instill national pride in people so we get them to stop littering and stop stealing and, you know, adopting more positive attitudes and outlooks. Do you see that as a valid argument, or do you agree or disagree?
It's never too late.
It's too late for this generation.
It's never too late for any generation. That's a defeatist
attitude,
approach.
mindset.
A give up, you know, or let's give up thing. And I wouldn't entirely blame persons for coming to that conclusion. I mean, when you look at the way the news would report the fact that our schools are under threat, the thefts at schools, but not only thefts at schools, students are being held up and robbed. Passers-by are being held up at selective locations in those overhead crossings on the highway. Young persons primarily are the ones engaging in what sounds like new thinking, that a hurricane is a good time to study where to go and thief. So, you know, hang 10, schools, homes. But growing up in Castries, you would know, like I did, that these things are not new. They are being reported more, maybe because they have become more frequent, you know, and the volume of repetition is now more. I think that the current generation has to be met at its level. You have to approach generations. I, at my age and stage, cannot tell the current generations how they should move. I can say so to them. I can advise them. But I cannot make them do it because we do not see the world the same. Our generation, and when I talk about generation, I'm looking at everybody from, we have to look at it in terms of the children from age 8 to 16. Then you look at the other generation from 16 to 34. But between 8 and 34, those young persons today see the world totally different. And those of us who would want to see them just automatically change and see the world like us have to wake up to the fact that we are not watching the world with the same eyes. So take, for example, the Tupac phenomenon. Get rich quick or die trying. I mean, this is what's in the back of the minds of too many, I wouldn't say the majority, but too many of our young persons. That this thing of going and study and waiting for a job and getting a salary that will never pay all your bills, why go through all that hassle? Life is short, you know. So might as well, I think of doing the things that will make me get rich quick. In a situation like that, you have cultivation of open fields for those who want to manipulate. The computer-minded young persons who could elevate theft to cyber theft, elevate crime to cyber crime. And when we in the society want to say that, okay, the youth are going astray and we have to give up, when we give up, we are leaving those who are prone to being manipulated, to the manipulators. But I'm also saying there are those among them who don't think that way. And I have spoken to young persons after the last general election who have expressed dissatisfaction with the results, not the result in terms of which party won and which party lost, but dissatisfaction with the result not being one that gives them any hope for the future. And in talking to a couple of them, what they said was that neither of the parties came off with programs and platforms that attracted them. The manifesto allocation for youth was a quarter page at most in each of the manifestos. So youth become a page in a chapter.
Yeah, but you in everything that you said that you focused on the youth. The youth was just one dimension of this. But what about the people who are the older persons, the generation before them, who have passed on, you know, what those young people are looking at and what the Voice newspaper is complaining about, the littering and the laid-back attitude and the lack of ambition, etc., etc. That's not just restricted to the youth. What example was set for them by the previous generation? How do you deal with them and change their mindset?
We have to change or redefine what we mean by national pride. United States today, the left quarterback fella who refused to salute to his anthem, if that had happened here, you think, how much support you think he would have got? I think that he would not have gotten that type of support because we have a sense of national pride which says, blindly do and say anything for your nation because it's your nation. But people are being asked to have that blind allegiance to the nation without being told why, without it being explained to them, you know, why they are the nation and the nation is not their, you know, a country or a government. The definition of the nation, the definition of the country, definition of the people, all civics, the civics we talk about, all of that needs to happen. You know, the guy who twisted my ear when I crossed the first pedestrian crossing in St. Lucia that was painted on Bridge Street across from what is now the First National Bank, which used to be the Penny Bank. The first pedestrian crossing was from there across the road to what used to be Bata. And we learned at the Methodist school in primary school in the gardens that in order to cross the pedestrian crossing, you look left, you look right, you look left again, and then you cross. Well, we would go and stand there and look left, look right, look left again, and as soon as a vehicle got close, we would just try crossing. And this guy came out, and he held me by my ear and virtually lifted me off the ground and asked me in Creole whether I had ever seen a vehicle in hospital.
Yeah.
I can tell you that 50 years later, that it brought me, that was my brought-up see. Because not only was my ears hurting me, but I couldn't go home and tell my mother that I'd get another licking. But he had come out there and was pointing out to us that we were doing nonsense. Now, we were doing what we learned at school, but we had put our own mischief into it. Today, that is not even taught. I see police officers, I see persons who are in uniform crossing the street 10 yards away from a pedestrian crossing on Jeremy Street. I see students and teachers coming from Anglican and Methodist school, and there is another pedestrian crossing at the intersection about the middle of Jeremy Street. And anytime you get there, look, nobody looks at the red, green, and yellow light. Everybody just automatically assumes once I get to the crossing, the car has to stop. And when they cross and you move, they would look at you like, what happened? You see I crossing? And clearly these people don't understand even. I don't even think they understand what the yellow is for.
Yeah, and not just not crossing, but crossing with no sense of urgency.
No sense of
urgency.
urgency,
For a break.
yeah.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation. Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about the Voice editorial and the need for social transformation, a resetting, if I can use that term, of the mindset of St. Lucians. As you were talking, you mentioned how we moved from just street crime to cyber crime. You moved from, stick-ups to fraud, and it threw me back to a sermon by Martin Luther King in the 1960s, and it's interesting hearing you say that, because that's precisely what he was saying. We become more sophisticated criminals. You lie and you cheat, but you do it with a bit of finesse, so that when you do it, it doesn't just become, robbery and stealing, but, it's fraud, it's embezzlement, and you've translated or ignored the 10 commandments and added an 11th commandment, thou shalt not get caught, and I'm listening to you and I'm reflecting on that sermon, and I'm wondering, from the 1960s to now, what has really changed? We're still dealing with the same issues, and according to the Voice, it's getting worse. It's saying we see our students in questionable circumstances, our youth with declining standards of dress and behavior, tampering with sex, alcohol, drugs. There's now a prevalence of parties and entertainment events that promote all kinds of negative practices, and are taking place right under our noses, sometimes it seems with tacit official approval. Is it tacit official approval, or is it just an acceptance that is what is cool now, that is what we've evolved, that's part of our evolution as human beings and as a society?
It has, you went back to Martin Luther King. Around the same time Martin Luther King made that statement in the 60s, Henry Kissinger, Secretary of State, received a Nobel Peace Prize. But Henry Kissinger, Secretary of State, also said, in terms of government breaking laws and doing illegal things and to justify the Vietnam War, he said to a head of government who was seeking America's advice and asking why they were just breaking the law like that, and Henry Kissinger's response was, in effect, if it's breaking the law, we could do it immediately. But to break the Constitution takes a little longer. These are the people who put into the law globally the thought that, or the law, that tax avoidance is legal, but tax evasion is not. And people have been trying to discover the thin line between tax evasion and tax avoidance. Well, as far as I'm concerned, there's no line. But what tax avoidance does is allows a Donald Trump to come out and say, I want to be president of the United States because I'm smart enough to have dodged taxes, paying taxes for 9 years. And he actually said so when Hillary Clinton said to him in the debate, hello, you haven't paid taxes for so long. And he says, because I'm smart.
Yeah.
So when fast forward to the current generation, having to cope in a state with laws that are still the same but have changed in their sophistry, have changed in their name. But the system is still one that is bucked, or that bucks against generational upliftment.
But you see, listening to you, it sounds like you're making a case for exactly what Zachary and a lot of other young people are saying, that it's too late, because people feel like it's not going to change. The system is, so why try Why bother?
The only thing that beats a trial is a failure. And why you mustn't give up is because we have to find new ways and means of bucking the system that is bucking us. We have a political system that forces us to depend on Parliament, to depend on members of Parliament, to depend on government, to do things for people. I voted for you, so you have to pay me back over the next 5 years for my vote. And until people continue to be encouraged to see themselves as having to be taken care of, no matter what generation it is, as long as you are waiting to be taken care of by the government or by your family, as long as you continue to see the responsibility for change being not one that has to be poured down your throat, but one that you need to feed yourself in the doses and spaces that will allow you to grow at your speed. Because, you know, the other danger is trying to force change down people's throats. You know, wanting to change the constitution because of somebody, wanting to change a law because of somebody. Constitutions affect everybody. I mean, you look at a situation, a case in the press, we know that in pursuit of one person, an entire staff, we can pay if the wording of an edict is general and broad enough and not specific.
But in that case, I don't think it was after they were going after one person, from what I've learned.
Oh well, it
ran a lot deeper than that.
Okay.
You know, but before we run out of time, I want to touch on the Teachers Week, Teachers Appreciation Week, World Teachers Day, because from the standpoint of the teaching of civics, it brought back to mind also the page 6 article or commentary in The Voice today by Mr. Clement Wolff-Solage, talking about teachers and leadership and looking at some of the different approaches to teaching around the world, in Europe, in Finland, in Norway, what is working there, where he's saying that the teacher is not so much required or expected to teach what he knows as to teach what he believes, to pass on his character, or his character should be influencing what he's teaching. He talks about some of the approaches in teaching where the teacher is more of a facilitator, like you were saying, you know, rather than forcing things down people's throats. And I think maybe that might be one of the issues that we have to contend with, and why we are dealing with some of the issues we're dealing with because of our education system.
Oh, we need a total
We're not teaching people to think for themselves.
We have a curriculum development unit. I think we need a curriculum redevelopment unit from the standpoint that we say so all the time that history is disappearing. There are schools in St. Lucia where history is not being taught. But then what do you expect when today's young person has to choose between history and IT, between English language and literature and an IT-related subject? So that what we teach at school, in my view, and I've always said so, has to be more oriented at changing or shaping the person who is going to leave that school by ensuring that his or her brain is sufficiently fed with as wide a range of issues that would allow him or her to decide and adapt to life. But if the teacher, for example, is deeply religious for one reason and is driven in his or her teaching by that deep religious fundamentalism, then it affects an entire classroom.
If I can quote Mr. Solage, he says here, as educators, we must embrace and incorporate the impact of our character as we teach much more of who we are than what we know. Yeah.
I agree with that 100%.
Yeah. And on that note, we've come to the end of our program for today. We are out of time. I want to thank you for viewing. Thank you for tuning in. Hopefully you'll join us next week when we'll be back here, God willing, for another program. Until then, enjoy.
And before you left, just wanted to stick in the point quickly that we tend to recognize World Press Freedom Day in June, but September the 8th, which is World Teachers Day, has also historically been observed by the United Nations as International Journalist Day. Sorry, September the 8th.
October.
Yeah, October the 8th, International Journalist Day. So we may want to revisit why it is no longer even spoken of. Good night, folks.